So hopefully everybody has, does everybody have the text in front of them?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 23. And this is in the middle of Moses recounting the conquests of the various desert tribes that Israel had fought against prior to the entering the land. And so here is what he says about this particular group. And I have to say, in preparing the class tonight, there was a lot of stuff in Rashi that was really obscure to me, and I had to go like looking elsewhere to figure out what was maybe self-evident to Rashi and maybe even self-evident to the people for whom Rashi wrote his commentary, but wasn't self-evident to me. So I actually learned a lot in preparing the class tonight, and I hope that you will as well. Okay, so the ha'avim hayoshvim b'chatzerim, the avim who dwell in open cities, ad Aza, up until Gaza, kaftorim hayotzim mikaftor hishmidum vayeshvu tachtam. The Kaftorites, the Kaftorim, who came from Kaftor, exterminated them and dwelt in their stead. Okay, and the Kaftorim apparently, I don't know, they're definitely referred to in at least one Haftarah as well. And they're a sea people who came and conquered the people who lived in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? But the question is, who are these Avim, and why was it necessary for the Kaftorim to destroy them? So Rashi says they are of the Philistine people, for they're listed together with them in the book of Joshua, as it says the 5 Philistine lords. Okay, so they're referred to in Joshua: the Gazites, the Ashdodites, the Ashkelonites, the Gittites, the Ekronites, and the Avim. Okay, so that's actually 6, right? But there's 6 Philistine lords, and then the Avim. And I don't know if you know, I mean, if you know the geography of Israel, right? I mean, Ashkelon is still is an Israeli city to this day. It's a fairly significant Israeli city. Ashdod is a fairly significant Israeli city, right? Most of you have probably been in both of these places, right? Gaza, we know about Gaza, right? It still exists, at least for now. And Ekron is not a, to my knowledge, it's not like an inhabited place, but it is an archaeological site. It is an archaeological site. We know where Ekron is, and there have been digs there. Okay, but then we get to this Avim. Okay, and who are these Avim? It says, because of the oath which Abraham had sworn to Avimelech, the Israelites were unable to take their land away from them. Okay, now this was like totally opaque to me. Okay, but I went back and I looked at the reference, and this is an Avimelech who it says dwelt in the Negev. Okay, Avimelech dwelt in the Negev, and there was an oath that Abraham took not to destroy Avimelech or his descendants. Okay, so far so good. What does this have to do with the Avim? And I don't expect you to know this, okay? But there are fairly early Talmudic references to the Avim being that Avimelech was the king of the Avim, or conversely, that the Avim are descended from Avimelech. Okay, so now Abraham has taken an oath, I will not destroy you or your descendants. Okay, right? So that's where the Avim figure in, right? So the Israelites were unable to take their land away from them. So I brought the Kaftarites against them, and they destroyed them and dwelt in their stead. Now you are permitted to take it from their possession, right? In other words, what is Rashi saying here?
Well, he didn't, he made it possible for them to conquer that by removing the Avim, who were conquered by somebody else against whom there was no pact, no agreement.
Right. It reminds me, I mentioned this, a couple of weeks ago in the Haftarah, where it was more than a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, where we read David's deathbed charge to Solomon, right? And he mentions, I think it's Shimi ben Gera, and he says, I promised him that I would not destroy him with the sword. Now you know what to do, right? And I promised him, right? I promised him that I would not kill him with the sword. Now you know what to do, right? So similarly, Abraham made this promise, right? That he wouldn't Abraham made the promise that he would not take away the land of the Avim, right? And now this promise binds God as well. Promise binds God as well. But God wants to give the land to Abraham's descendants, right? So what does he do? He finds a loophole, right? Abraham promised that he wouldn't take the land away from the Avim. So I can't let him conquer it from the Avim. But Abraham didn't promise that somebody else wouldn't conquer it. And Abraham didn't promise not to conquer it from the Kaftarites, right? So it's like, but it's very, and this just popped into my head, but it reminds me, all right, so normative Orthodox halacha is that you are not allowed to sell a synagogue if it's going to be converted into a church. Okay, why not? Why not? Stan? You got to unmute yourself.
In that they would make sacrifices in the church.
Well, not exactly sacrifices, but it's, it's a voda zara, right? It's idolatry, right? And we cannot, it's not only that we're not allowed to commit idolatry, right? We're not allowed to enable or assist other people to commit idolatry. Yeah, Dee.
It's just ironic because in my lifetime, I know of at least 3 synagogues, including B'nai Israel, that did exactly that on multiple occasions.
Raksh, as they say in modern Hebrew, Rakshnia. Okay,
So I
a
messed up
moment.
again.
Okay, no, you didn't mess up, but you're a step
did.
ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But they did.
We don't hold that way, okay? Because so that by this same like halacha, it wouldn't be forbidden to sell a shul to be converted into a mosque, right? Because Islam is monotheistic, right? There's no question that Islam is monotheistic. Right now, we may have disagreements with Muslims about the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? Although, as you should know, right, 90% of American Muslims are not Arabs, right? And many of them, and increasingly even non-Palestinian Arabs, don't care about the Israeli-Palestine conflict, as evidenced by the rapprochement between Israel and the Gulf states, or Israel and Morocco, right? But regardless of any political issues, Islam is monotheistic, right? So that black letter Orthodox halacha says that you can never go into a church.
Right.
Because it's a place of idolatry. It doesn't say you can't go into a mosque. Okay, now we don't hold that way. I would say we, meaning the conservative movement in general, and certainly I don't hold that way because I don't believe that Christianity is idolatry, right? It's certainly error, okay, but there's a difference between error and idolatry. Okay, it's specifically their beliefs about Jesus are, from the perspective of normative Judaism, erroneous, right? You can be a person or you can be God, but you can't be both at the same time. That is, say, human being or God, but you can't be both at the same time. And if you believe that this same being, if you believe that Jesus of Nazareth was a human being and also God, that's an erroneous belief, right? But it's not necessarily an idolatrous belief. But at any rate, so yes, there are many synagogues that have been converted into churches, right? Now, and at times, look, today, the line between conservative Judaism and Orthodox Judaism is bright and firm. Okay, in a previous generation, the line between conservative and orthodoxy was not so bright and firm. Right? Like I know from my dad, I never met my father's father. Okay, but my father's father, my grandfather, was very, very frum. I know stories about him. I don't have time to go into it now. And yet, he davened in a conservative shul. Now, how could he daven in a conservative shul? Because the main sanctuary had mixed seating, but there was also a base medrash that had a mechitza.
Right.
And he davened God forbid he should ever go into the mixed seating sanctuary, but he would daven in the base medrash, right? But there are Orthodox synagogues that have become churches too. Now, how does that happen? How does that happen if the halacha is clear that you cannot sell a synagogue to become a church? So,
well, I'm thinking that
you can keep unmuted. It's a small enough group, and you're not rowdy. I trust you not to just jump in.
We could fix that.
that's right.
Go
No,
get
it's
it.
Do they have like a third party where they would sell maybe the deed to somebody else who then would sell it to the church.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Exactly. Right. You
That's
sell
why,
it.
that's why, Rabbi, she can't move.
Hmm? I'm sorry. I didn't hear you.
I said last night she announced she's moving, and I said
Oh.
tonight that's why she can't move.
Right.
But I
Right,
can
no, but
still be on. I can still be online.
I told
Yeah, we get in
Marsha
people
the
from
same thing.
Chicago.
Right. Right. No, I remember that. I was still here for that discussion. But yes, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, you cannot sell a synagogue to become a church. You can sell a synagogue to a real estate agency.
Mm-hmm.
And then the real estate agency can turn around and sell it to a church. Right?
And he makes
And-
money.
Right. Everybody makes money. But the point is, look, I mean, if we were to ever sell our building, right, there are only two uses for that building, right? One use is to become a church. The other is to be knocked down and have something else built there, right? You can't, if you have a synagogue building, there's no other use for it, right? It's got to become either a church, or some other house of worship. If not a church, then a mosque, or, a Hindu temple, a Buddhist temple. And from the perspective of black letter halacha, I mean, selling it to Hindus or Buddhists would be far worse, right? Because
Really,
again, I don't necessarily hold that way, right? But if you walk into a Hindu temple, it certainly looks like a house of idolatry, right? They have statues and they put offerings in front of the statues and they pray to the statues, right? I mean, that's like classic idolatry, right? So again, I don't want to get bogged down on that, right? But the point is that if you have to sell your shul and you don't want to lose all the value, you have to sell it to a church. You have to. Yeah, D.
I mean, I know I'm stretching, but I think I see a connection here. I'm not sure. Is there an equivalent, this subterfuge that God did and then David did and what we're talking about here? Is there a similarity at all with selling our chametz to you, or having what used to be in my grandparents' day a Shabbos goy?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the sense that it is a legal fiction. I mean, it's not a legal fiction. I mean, it's not a fiction. It's legal, right? But it is a way of fulfilling the letter of the law when fulfilling the spirit of the law is prohibitively expensive.
Oh, okay.
Right? If you look and so absolutely right. And I'll respond a little bit more from a historical perspective and then we'll move on. Look, the idea that, I have half a box of Wheaties in my closet and I don't want to throw them away, so I'll sell them and then buy them back after Pesach. That's clearly not what it was intended to do, right? It started because in Poland, many Jews were distillers. Okay, and distilled spirits are pure chametz,
Mhm.
right? And you can't now. Granted that vodka is not aged the way blah 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 blah, but even so, I mean, if you take, two of the largest distilleries in this country are privately owned by Jewish families. Okay, Heaven Hill and Buffalo Trace. Right now, granted that bourbon is 51% corn, is at least 51% corn, and corn is not hametz, it's kitniot, and there's no prohibition on owning kitniot. But bourbon also has rye, wheat, or barley, right? Usually 2 out of the 3, right? This fermented rye, fermented wheat, fermented barley is definitionally hametz, right? So, considering that, straight whiskey is aged for a minimum of 4 years, right? It's gone through 4 Pesachs, right? If they had to literally get rid of all of their
They'd be
hametz, you can't be distillers. You can't be distillers, right? So they have to sell their hametz, right? And that's where it comes from, right? It's not to save half a box of Wheaties or 3 bagels that you forgot to eat and you threw them in the back of your freezer. It's intended really. It's what's known halakhically as hefsed merubah. Okay, significant financial loss.
Right.
Right. And obviously, not being able to sell a shul only so that it could be knocked down and something else built in its place. Now it depends where the shul is. I mean, the fact of the matter is, from our perspective, the land is probably much more valuable than the building. Right, depending on whether the county will let them, whatever. But in most places that's not necessarily the case, right? And if the only halachic way to sell the shul building is for it to be knocked down, conceivably hefsed merubah, right? So a mechanism was developed to comply with the letter of the law when it was impossible to comply with the spirit of the law, right? I mean, I hate to use that kind of Christian terminology, but but nevertheless. What? All right, so this is a similar situation, right? God create in this. Right, in the previous instances I'm talking about, human beings created a way to get around God's law. Here, God created a way to get around human law.
Oh,
right? It's kind of a mirror image, right? I mean, Abraham made a promise. God is bound by it, but he doesn't want to be bound by it. So he's come up with a way to get around it. Okay. So I sent messengers from the desert of Kedmot to Sihon, king of Heshbon, with words of peace, saying. Okay. So I sent messengers from the desert with words of peace. Okay. Even though the omnipresent, right, Hamakom, meaning God, had not commanded me to call to Sihon in peace, I learned to do so from the incident at the desert of Sinai, i.e. relating to the Torah, which preceded Kadma. So he's using the word Kedmot and Kadma, the world. Okay, relating to the Torah, which preceded the world. Okay, now the Torah which preceded the world is not actually even directly relevant to the point that Rashi wants to make here, but nevertheless, there is a rabbinic idea that the Torah predated creation. Okay, that in fact the Torah is the blueprint of creation, right? And how did God know how to create the world? How did God know how to create the world? Histakla be'oraita uvara alma. Okay, I know that like your Aramaic may not be all that strong, right? God looked into the Torah and created the world, right? That's how God knew how to create the world, because the instructions were in the Torah. So the Torah pre-exists even the world, right? It's now, and again, not to get bogged down, right? But if you look at the beginning of the Gospel of John, right? If you look at the beginning of the Gospel of John, right? I'm sure you all know your John very well, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's exactly the same idea, right? I mean, it's kind of funny because John is the most anti-Jewish of all the Gospels, right? Most of the classic Christian anti-Judaism is found in God, is found in John, rather, right? Is found in John. But this idea that in the beginning was the Word, what does that mean? Right? I mean, the Torah begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But John says in the beginning was the Word. The Word existed before the heavens and the earth. And the Word was with God. And then it takes it one step further and says, and the Word was God, right? Because who is the incarnation of the Word? Jesus, who's God, right? But the pre-existing Torah. Okay, so Rashi alludes to that doctrine, right? Even though it's not necessarily relevant to the point he wants to make, but it's sort of, it's there, and why not make reference to it? Okay, and I think and this idea of the pre-existing Torah, I mean, something that not a lot of lay Jews, and frankly, it's something that not even a lot of rabbis know. I mean, I've mentioned it to other rabbis, and they're like, "What the hell are you talking about?" But it's important. It's important. I mean, Marcia, you probably learned something about this with Gidon Amir at some point. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Right. But when I say to Christian groups sometimes, if you don't understand Judaism, you can't really understand Christianity, right? Because the first verse of John makes no sense without reference to the rabbinic doctrine of the pre-existing Torah. No sense whatsoever. And conversely, right, the best source of knowledge about Jews and Judaism in the late Second Temple period is the Gospels, right? Because the Gospel, as far as the authors of the Gospel, with the exception of John, right, the Gospel authors thought that they are Jews writing for other Jews. They're not Christians writing for other Christians. There's no such thing as Christians. They're Jews, right? They're the Jews who believe in Jesus as the Messiah, as opposed to all the other Jews who don't, right? Just like today, the Chabadskers are the Jews who believe in Schneerson as the Messiah, when all the other Jews don't. And that is not a joke. That is not a joke.
I know.
It is exactly the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. And it's now what? Almost 30 years since the death of Schneerson, and we haven't kicked them out yet. And 30 years after the death of Jesus, the Jews hadn't kicked out the Jesus movement either, right? At a certain point they did, right? And maybe at a certain point we will. I don't know. I mean, I'm increasingly of the belief that probably won't happen, which theologically is problematic, but yeah, D.
I'm just confused about something.
Yeah.
I know that I frequently take things very literally, but this keeps referencing the Torah. I know there's always been a controversy about whether it was the Torah written by man or was the Torah written by God. That's just one thing I'm throwing out there. The thing that I'm confused about is when God, this says God gave the Torah at Sinai, but what we refer to at Sinai is the giving of the 10 Commandments. Are they one and the same in this context?
Yes.
I'm
All
really
right.
confused.
Right. No, it's confusing. It's a great question to which I don't really have a satisfactory answer. Okay, because the word Torah means many things.
Right.
Right. And it means them all simultaneously.
Okay.
Right. It means, I mean, you can't simultaneously believe that the Torah pre-existed the creation of the world and that it was given at Sinai.
Right.
Right, right.
Right.
But Rashi believes both of them, right? And that's normative Jewish belief, right? I mean, it was, I think it was F. Scott Fitzgerald who said, the sign of a first-rate intelligence is to be able to hold two conflicting ideas in your mind at the same time, right? And I absolutely agree with him, right? I mean, and if you are rigidly logical, that's really hard to do, right? But
in this passage, does it
okay.
not seem to say that the Torah and the 10 Commandments are, if you combine that with our current thinking or definitions?
Right. Okay. No, I get you, and it's a great question. Okay, and here is my answer. All right. The Torah, meaning in this sense, when I say Torah, I mean the text of the Pentateuch, right? The text of the Pentateuch seems to believe that what was revealed at Sinai was the 10 Commandments, right? I mean, it's appropriate that we're discussing it tonight because that's this week's parsha. Rabbinic Judaism believes that what was revealed at Mount Sinai was the entire text of the Pentateuch, right? And if you are an Orthodox rabbi and you give a sermon saying, I do not believe that the text of the Pentateuch was given word for word at Mount Sinai, you have instantaneously gone from being an Orthodox rabbi to being a former Orthodox rabbi.
Maybe even a rabbi at all, if you survive it. I really didn't mean to take you away from what you're trying to do.
No, it's a great look. If we do 2 verses tonight, we do 2 verses tonight. It's fine, right? There's no deadline, there's no final, right? We're learning, right? And we are learning. The Torah does not make that claim for itself, but the rabbis make that claim for the Torah. Okay, so when Rashi talks about the Torah revealed at Mount Sinai, he's talking about the entirety of the Torah, right? In fact, he's talking about more than that. He's talking about not only the text of the Torah, but the hermeneutic rules by which the Torah is interpreted, right? So that, and this becomes very complicated, okay? Because, I have had, on many more than one occasion, right, discussions with sincere and faithful Jews who hold that it is perfectly fine to eat, let's say, Purdue chicken, right? Because nowhere in the Torah does the Torah prescribe the method of slaughter, right? The
That's
Torah
that's for chicken or for livestock too?
for
Not all.
livestock too. For
Okay.
livestock, I just wanted to throw out a brand.
Okay.
Okay, because I don't know any brands of beef that aren't, because we don't
Okay.
do brands of beef,
Okay.
right? But it's perfectly fine to go into Giant or Wegmans and buy, a rib steak out of the butcher case, because nowhere does the Torah tell you how to slaughter the animals. It just tells you what animals it could eat, right? But
The
the
other
Torah
hand,
does say, you shall slaughter them as I have commanded you. Okay? But the rules that the rules that the Torah asserts were commanded are not in the text of the Torah. Okay, now this lot, even to me, right, who's a complete heretic and skeptic, right, implies an oral Torah, right?
Right.
Because the Torah says, slaughter them as I commanded you.
Right.
And everybody, yeah, of course, right? But they're not in the Torah. Well, they're not in the Torah, but it doesn't mean that they weren't already known at that time, right? So you can't, in other words, there is, as far as I'm concerned, there is no such thing as following the Torah but not following the rabbinic interpretations. No such thing. It's all one piece.
Doesn't that also go back to before Moses died? I forget the parsha that we read, but it's at the end.
It's the very last parsha.
He gathers the people together and he goes back through and teaches them all over again. Doesn't that also reinforce the idea that it was oral?
Yeah, of course. Right. So you can't, so the word Torah has many different meanings. Okay, the word Torah has many different meanings, and even the presumed content of the revelation at Sinai has many different meanings. Okay, but let's to simplify it, let's say when Rashi talks about the Torah that was revealed at Sinai, he means the text of the Pentateuch, right? But he also, in the very same sentence, tells us that the Torah existed before the world. So how can something that was I guess you could say it existed before the world but wasn't known. Right? In the same way that a book exists before it's published.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It exists before it's published, but it wasn't known. So I guess that's one way to resolve that seeming contradiction, right? But Rashi doesn't seem excessively concerned about it, right? But all right, so here's the point. And this is actually a well-known midrash, right? When the Holy One, blessed be he, was about to give the Torah to Israel, he took it to Esau and Ishmael. Although it was clear to him that they would not accept it, nevertheless, he began with them in peace. So to our first call to Sichon with words of peace. Okay, now, a couple of things are going on here at the same time, right? The one is that, you should always make the offer even if you're pretty sure it's not going to be accepted, right? You should always make the offer even if you're pretty sure it's not going to be accepted. And so here God offered the Torah to Esau and Ishmael, even though he was pretty sure that they wouldn't accept it, but he wanted to offer them. Now, when I say a couple things, I mean, maybe even more than a couple things. I mean, first of all, on the most basic level, this is a shtuch to Christianity and Islam, right? Because Esau is Christianity, because Esau is Edom, which is Rome, which is Christianity, right? And Ishmael is Islam, right? So, when the Christians and the Muslims say, well, you guys were first only because God gave you the Torah first, this Midrash says, no, it was offered to you and you turned it down. Right? So don't go saying you're better than us. We had it first, only it was offered to you. It was offered to you, you turned it down, and we said yes. Right? I mean, it's also, in the Torah, when you're going to war, you have to offer terms of peace first. Right? You cannot just launch into a war. Right? You cannot just launch into war. You have to offer terms of peace. And then if they turn down your terms of peace, then you can launch a war against them. But no sneak attacks. All right? So that's part of what's going on here as well. That's what's going on with Sichon, right? In other words, I knew that Sichon wouldn't accept the offer of peace, but I was obligated by the Torah to offer them peace, and I could only attack them after they had turned it down. Right now, but you understand what I'm saying? I mean, should I stop here for any questions or comments? Okay. Now this idea is that you should always offer, even if you think it's going to be turned down. So this happened in my own life. Okay, when my stepsister got married, and this is a convoluted story, but when my stepsister is a pediatrician. Okay, and when she got married, she was the chief of pediatrics at the Indian Health Service Hospital on the Navajo Reservation in Chinle, Arizona. Okay, which is like as remote as it can possibly be. Like you want to go to the grocery store, it's 3 hours there and 3 hours back. And so they knew that very few people were going to be able to come. So what they decided to do is actually get married on the reservation with a chuppah but no ketubah, and then have a ketubah signing ceremony back on the East Coast. Okay, which I actually officiated at. But the week of the wedding, I'm on the phone with my brother, and we're talking past each other, okay? Because my brother is telling me about his flights to Arizona and how he's getting from the airport to the reservation and so on. And I said, "You're going to the wedding?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "I wasn't even invited, and you're going?" And I'm like, "What the hell?" So I called up my dad and I said, "What the hell?" And he said, "Well, I knew you couldn't make it, so I didn't send you an invitation." Or I told them not
Never,
to send.
never.
Because I would have gone. I would have gone, but by then it was like 5 days before the wedding. It was,
Yeah, but isn't that often the case where you're counting on, in other words, I don't even know how to put it.
You expect to have 150 people. You want 125 people, but you invite 150, and you hope 25 will turn you down.
Yeah, but you also knew that at least among Jews, it's a rule that you invite the same rank of relatives.
Right.
Right? You have to invite all the first cousins or none of the first cousins. Right? You have to invite all of the second cousins or none of the second cousins. right? So you can't invite one stepbrother and not the other stepbrother.
But did it have anything to do with your being a rabbi and they're deciding that you wouldn't, I don't know, was this a mixed marriage?
No, it wasn't a
Oh,
mixed marriage.
okay.
But my dad thought, Shabbos, kosher food, blah, 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 blah. You know, as well as the fact that I was serving shul, but you know, I could have gotten the weekend off with enough notice.
Right.
Right? I mean, I have taken weekends off. I can't take a weekend off like, you know, on 5 days notice, but I can take a weekend off with 2 months notice. Right? You know, unless like, you know, my father died or I got sick or something, that's a different story, right? But no, he just assumed that I wouldn't go because of, I don't know exactly, kashrus or Shabbos or something. So he didn't, and he meant well. In other words, he really didn't want me to feel bad telling them no. He absolutely meant well, but it was the wrong thing to do, right? But even in the course that I'm taking now, we learned something about the ladder of expectations, right? And it reminded me of this story, you know, story, joke, whatever, which you probably heard, where, you know, this guy wants to borrow his neighbor's leaf blower, right? So he's walking over to his house to ask for the leaf blower, and he says, what if he won't lend it to me, right? I bet you he won't lend it to me, right? That schmuck, who is that schmuck not to lend me his leaf blower, right? And by the time he gets to the door, he knocks on the door and he says, you can keep your damn leaf blower, I don't want it anyway, right? And but this is what happens in life, right? This is what happens in life, right? We anticipate people's reactions and we react to the anticipated reaction, which may not be the actual reaction, right? So that, you know, you can't say, I mean, the Torah is very explicit here. You can't say, if I offer my enemy peace, I know they'll turn me down, so I'll just go ahead and attack them and skip that step. You can't do that. You have to offer them peace, right? And that's what Moses did here, learning from the example of God. God didn't say, and God surely knows, right? Because God knows the future. God didn't say, well, I know that the Esauites and the Ishmaelites will turn the Torah down, so why even waste my time offering it to them? No, I'm going to offer it to them. And if they turn it down, they turn it down. But then it's on them, it's not on me. Mm-hmm. Right? And now, but the flip side, it's very interesting, right? Because there's also this halachic concept called Gnevat Da'at. Gnevat Da'at means, literally it means theft of the mind, okay? But what it means is essentially any form of deception, right? So here's an example of something that you're not allowed to do, right? And now, well, I'm going to tell you what you're not allowed to do, right? I'm having a party. I know for a fact that on the weekend that I'm having the party, Stan and Ethel are going to be in Florida, right? I know that for a fact, okay? I don't really want Stan and Ethel at my party. And
that was what I was trying to say earlier. Yes, absolutely.
You're not the only one. I've got a lot of people who don't want me at their party.
No. Mine had nothing to do with you, but that example is what I was trying to get out of my mouth.
Right?
I'm not going to Florida for no money.
But
so
just
don't have a party, Rabbi.
right? It's a theoretical
I'm gonna
example,
crash his party.
okay? I maybe even do want you at my party, but I know you can't come because I know you're going to be in Florida, right? So I send you an invitation because all it costs me is the cost of the invitation and the cost of the stamp, right? And maybe you'll send me a present, but I'm not counting on a present, but you'll have goodwill towards me because I invited
Right.
you to my party,
Right.
right?
Right.
If I invite you to my party with the intention of receiving your goodwill, when I know that you cannot come, that's Genevat Dat,
Which means,
right? Theft of the mind.
uh,
Okay.
Say that again, what is?
but
Genevat Dat, like Ganef, right? Ganef,
thief. Yeah.
right? Ganef is a thief. Da'at is the mind or knowledge. Ani Yodea.
But Rabbi, the flip of what you just described, there is an upside to that. I don't want to go into detail, and I don't want to reveal anything that's confidential, but you truly worked magic in a mediation situation for me a long
Right.
time ago. And I had expectations that didn't allow me, and it's hard for me to say this, but didn't allow me at all to see the other perspective. So I
Right.
couldn't let go of the passionate feelings that I had, about which I had good reason to have the feelings, but it was illogical not to try to find a way to get rid of them. And so this issue with somebody else went on and really was god awful.
Right.
But what I'm trying to get to is, with no real expectation except the realization that there was a big part of responsibility on my part, I went to this person. This is long after your efforts had a chance to percolate. And I apologized. It was in private, but I apologized and even offered to make a public apology. And I didn't feel, what's the word I want? I didn't feel any less I didn't feel like I lost power or like I lost the war or anything else. I just felt that it was something I had to do. I was expecting something that would be lifelong, basically, since you've taken a few liberties tonight. I was really expecting something like go to hell, or who do you think you are, or no way. What I got was a hug.
Right.
And an acceptance of mutual responsibility. And what could have been just a god-awful lifelong experience wound up in a friendship reborn, which we had to begin with. That's about as non-invasive of privacy as I can get, but I think it speaks to the depth of what you're saying with a lot of spokes in the wheel.
No, absolutely. And it's, how to navigate, right, between the Scylla of you have to offer peace and the Charybdis of Gnevat Da'at, right, is not easy.
No, it isn't.
Right? It's not easy, right? I mean, and only the only person who knows their own motivations is themselves, right? And then even sometimes we don't know our own motivation, right? And so, were you being like Moses, right? And I don't know the answer, but this is the question, right? Were you being like Moses and saying, even though I don't think he'll accept my apology, I'm going to offer it, right? And then you were pleasantly surprised that he accepted the apology, right? Or was it Gnevat Dat, where you said, I know he won't accept my apology, but I'll make myself look good by offering it.
I can answer that today. I couldn't have answered that then. And,
Right.
and my answer is there wasn't an ulterior motive except for an honest apology without any,
Okay.
yeah. That's
Well,
why.
so then you were like Moses,
Well, I don't know about that.
rather than like me
I don't
inviting
have a rod.
Stan, rather than like me inviting Stan to the party that I don't want him to come to. Right?
Marcia
I'm
can't
sorry.
see your face.
Right?
But that's
So-
a great
Mhm.
point. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, and this, I'm gonna wrap up. We didn't get very far, but I think we still learned a lot, which is fine, right? But you have, if you've paid attention, okay, and looking at who's here, I will assume that you've had, right? I have quoted, in fact, I quoted it in my 2-minute Torah this week, right? From Ismar Shorsh about Judaism being balancing the polarities, right? I mean, is it, right? Are we supposed to be concerned about Jews, or are we supposed to be concerned about everybody? The answer is yes.
Yes.
Right? Is ritual most important or social justice most important?
Yes.
The answer is yes,
Yes.
right?
Mm,
It's
right.
balancing the polarities, right? And so is it important for me to offer peace even if I think it won't be accepted? Or is it important for me to avoid deception that's simply aimed at getting goodwill? And the answer is yes, right? Because only you know what your motivations are. Well, you know what your motivations are, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu knows what your motivations
Yeah.
are, right? And that's it, right? That's all you can do. All right, thanks a lot.
Yashikoa.
And Stan, if I hurt your feeling by inviting you to my party that you can't come to and that I'm not having.
It won't be the first time
Right.
for both things that I
Have a
haven't been
safe
invited to
trip
someone's
that you're
party and
not
that you
taking
hurt my
to
feelings.
Florida. Have a safe trip that you're not taking to Florida. Okay.
I'm hoping.
All right.
We're not
good
going to
Shabbos,
Florida.
everybody.
Rabbi,
I'd rather
I
go to
have to,
Chicago.
Rabbi, I have to say, I've said it before, but I have to say, I don't like Rashi. And it's not that I don't like learning. I love learning, but I don't like Rashi, but I like what you do with him.
Yes.
All right. That's good. All right. Good.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
everybody.
Rabbi.
Stay well,
All right.
Marcia.
Marsha, how you doing?
Very
Okay.
interesting.
Okay, doing okay so far.
Okay,
Are-
you're
are
adjusting
you
and
moved-
making new friends?
I'm meeting new people.
Are you
Spending-
moved in, Marcia, officially
Yeah, I
moved in?
moved in. Are you moving?
Yes, she
I'm
is.
moving to Falls Church, Virginia. Not as
thought
far
might
as
be
you.
going- I thought you might be moving closer to your daughter, right? Yeah.
Right, but it'll be a couple months.
Yeah, okay, but you're not going to lose touch with us, with me.
Oh, no, I'm still going to be online and,
I'm
and
gonna
in
go
my
get her.
case, I could still come, to Shul, I 35, 40 minutes. It's not that bad.
Stan,
It
say
takes me
hello.
that long to get across town.
Yeah, right.
Stan, say hello to Ethel for me.
Okay,
Good night, everybody.
thank you.
Okay, good night.
Enjoy.
Good night.
Night all.
Good night.